Okay, so we were talking about the 50s and the slick back hair, which in all parts of the school system, the high school system, boys' high schools and girls' high schools, and we would have dances together, and stuff like that. And of course, it was a really fun time. It was related a lot to music and doo-wop and all that stuff. And we had our high school proms and all that. Went to college at Ursuline, which later became Bellarmine University, and it was a very happy time. And I remember a guy I was dating was going to, he was doing some kind of program on the radio that night, and we were going there first, and he was going to play some Polish records. He was Polish. And so I got in the car and sat on his records, which stupidly he had on the front seat, but I sat on them. And of course a few of them broke. And I spent the next few days on the phone trying to replace those records, but he went on the radio anyway and did a fine job, and it was all okay. So
that's too funny.
That was good.
So tell us about Dad. What was that like?
Okay, well, I've known Dad vaguely since first grade, because we went to the same school. We lived only about 2 blocks apart. And I knew his name, and I can remember in grade school, I always remembered that he was allowed to have an orange on his desk because he had diabetes, and if he needed the orange, he had it there. Okay, so anyway, he was a good-looking little fella, and little blonde, and but I was never really interested in him. I had a boyfriend already whom I kissed on the ear, I remember. I went to kiss him and cut his ear. So, okay, finally we got out of high school and we went to college, and I met, one day Marianne and I were going to a movie downtown. We went to see The Diary of Anne Frank. And I especially wanted to see it because I had just been to Europe and had gone to Amsterdam and had gone into Anne Frank's house. And they were making that movie there at that time. And I met the assistant director, and we had drinks. And he said, oh, if you want to be in the movie, you can be an extra, come over. But we left the next day, so that was, but the kids used to tease me about, oh, we could have been George Stevenson's son instead of Papa's son. I don't think we all liked it, any of us. Okay, so anyway, sitting in the next row behind us was a young man. It was dark, we didn't know who he was or care. And when the lights came on, he leaned over and he said, do you know what time it is? And I said, oh my gosh, it's John Kiesler. Yes, he said, we chatted for a few minutes, and the next day he called me up for a date. So we went out, and one of the things we did was we went bowling with this other couple who were friends of his. And let's see, what else do we know about that time?
Was his first date, was he nervous at the time, or was he nervous, or was he smooth, or?
Oh, he was, I think he was late. That's most of what I can remember about John's dating system was he was late.
How was he dressed? Was he or was he?
No, he was dressed fine. Yeah, we were, and I remember this time that we went bowling. I had gone to watch my dad bowl, and he even bowled a 300 game. They wanted him to go play in some kind of tournament. And so anyway, I was used to going to see it, but I had never bowled. And I didn't know we were going going bowling. So I had on this pretty dress and curls, and I remember the dress was navy blue and the shoes were red with nice high heels, you know. And so we go to the bowling alley. Well, of course, I got bowling shoes and didn't know how to bowl very well, and so I think I bowled 62 or something, and it was very bad. But anyway, we had a good time.
So at about that period, it was getting into the late 50s, and right?
Yeah, it was moving on into the 50s, on in the 50s. Yeah.
On into the 50s. And at that point, your father was beginning to get sick. Can
My
you
father
talk briefly about
had
that?
a stroke, and he was able to talk and all, but the muscles in his face were weak, and he just, you know, was tired, and it was just very, very sweet and very sad.
And how did the end happen with Gagi and?
Well,
can you talk briefly about that?
That's really interesting. He was in the big bedroom upstairs, and I gave him his last shave. I used my little electric razor that I had used on my legs and gave him his shave, I thought, for the day. And while I was talking to him, he just stopped breathing. And so I called my mom, and she came up, and we all, you know, just talked to him. And my one brother had been there, Joe had been there to see him, and my other brother hadn't gotten there yet, but he came, and I can remember us all being there, and just we knew that it was time for Dad, and he was just so happy, so pleasant. And any time we did something for him, he'd say thank you. And he was just a lovely man.
It's a wonderful story of, you know, how your family came together, you know. So talk a little bit now as we move into the early 60s, you know, what that was like.
Okay.
Particularly as Dad is now becoming a more present fixture in your family.
Well, yeah, actually, you know, we were dating, and let's see, what did I want? Oh, I was teaching school at Sacred Heart. I was a French teacher and taught literature and French and religion. That was interesting. And being a Catholic school, Sacred Heart always began each class with a prayer. And believe me, I prayed before those religion classes, because the very first day that we were there, and you have to understand that things were not so open then as they are now. And the very first day, one of those sweet little girls in that class, in that religion class, stood up and asked me, well, what's the difference between birth and conception?
Too funny.
Well, yeah, I can remember it so clearly.
That's hilarious. So you and Dad got married in 61. So,
In 60.
Or 60. So talk about that, you know, how, you know, what the wedding was like.
Oh, it was so nice. It was lovely. I got my dress at Stewart's in Louisville, and it was so pretty. It was real silk and just gorgeous. And I had a veil of lace that I had brought from Brussels that I watched the lady finish. And it was, and my two nieces, Marianne and Martha, were both in the wedding. And Marianne was my maid of honor, and Martha was a bridesmaid. And they looked so pretty. They wore pink.
Going back in time just for a minute here, how did the proposal go down with your dad?
Oh, well, that was interesting. Sometimes on Sunday evenings, Grandma would be at work, and Dad would, you know, we'd want to go out or something, and then when it got towards dinner time and all, he'd say, well, let's go home and get Mike some dinner. Because Mike would be at home by himself. He was just a young kid. And, you know, like about 14, 15 years old. So we'd go over to John's house, and I'd fix a little dinner for him. And we'd sit down, the three of us, and have dinner, and then we'd watch TV for a little while, or go take a ride, or walk, or something, the three of us. And so then finally about, I guess about 9:30, 10 o'clock, John would walk me home, because we were only two blocks apart. And so we're walking across Delore to go to my house. And John said to me, I wanted to ask you a question. And he was always saying that, because he would ask me, how do you say such and such in French, and things like that, you know. And so I said, yeah. And he said, I wondered if you would marry me. And I said, well, yeah. and we kept on going. You know, kept on walking home. I said, that was it.
Well, so what were you thinking at the time? Were you elated? You know, were you like...
I guess we were both glad that the other one said, you know, brought it up or answered yes. But, I mean, there was no dancing in the street.
So
it was just like, well, of course.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, it was just meant to be.
Yes, it was. It was
so we talked about the wedding, and that was in '60, and then of course Margaret is born in '61, followed by Chris in '63, Jack in '64, and Paul in '66. So cover briefly, you know, knowing that you got 4 kids, but we only have so much time, you know, any unique memories that you may have of the births, and then try to somehow wedge in the fact that a big event occurred in November 22nd of '63.
Oh, yes.
And what that was like during that period.
Yes. Okay, well, Margaret's birth was really memorable, because she was 6 weeks overdue. And the doctor had me go for x-rays, and there was this x-ray of this little body dancing, all stretched out and everything. And Dad would joke, because I was very small at that time, and I had this huge belly from Margaret being 9 pounds and 12 ounces by that time. And also I had a tumor, and so, you know, and my hair was cut very short like it is now. And he would say, you look like Joan of Arc smuggling a watermelon. But it was we were both so excited, and I can remember finally the doctor said, oh, you got to come to the hospital. I'm going to start you on Pitocin tomorrow. So he said, be here tomorrow morning. So of course I had to bathe everything. You know, I was just, you shave your legs and everything, just going to be perfect, you know. And so I was in the bathroom cleaning my ears with a Q-tip, and Papa came in, and he looked at me and he said, oh, honey, you don't think it's going to come out your ear, do you? So I assured him I knew where it was going to come. So anyway, that was Margaret, and then Chrissy, and the doctor slept on. I remember I went to the hospital, and the doctor slept on a cot outside of the labor room, because I had had a section with Margaret, and I was going to be one of the first people to have a natural delivery after a section. Usually once you had a section, you always had to. So he was very concerned and slept out there. So anyway, her delivery was just wonderful, you know. And there was this cute little baby with the little blonde curls and all. Okay, so then there was the famous Jack.
Your favorite child?
One of my favorite children, yes, absolutely. I have 4. And so anyway, he was born in Indianapolis, the same as the 2 girls. And when he was born, about a little bit after that, we were going to move back to Louisville, I think when he was about 6 weeks old. And so we had arranged for me to go on the bus with Jack, and Papa had driven the girls down to stay with Gagi the weekend before. Well, a snowstorm came, and it was immense. And we finally were able to get out to take me to the bus with Jack, and by this time, you know, we had run out of diapers, and oh, it was just, and there was nothing open. You couldn't even go to a drugstore and get diapers, you know. So anyway, to make a long story short, Jack and I trudged down to Louisville on a bus, a Greyhound bus, and so then we stayed there until we found, stayed at Gagi's till we found a place to stay. And then we moved out on Dixdale, and we just had a wonderful time there, in spite of the fact that it was kind of strange. We had some kind of strange neighbors, but they were fun little kids to play with, and it was good. And I can remember at night we would all get together to say our prayers, and Jack was sitting on my lap, and we would, and the girls were standing right here, you know, and we would say our prayers, and one of them was, please Jesus, give us a healthy baby. And so then the girls would right away say, because I would not tell them, I would tell them they could not say, give us a boy or give us a girl. Because we didn't know what it was going to be in those days, and we had to be satisfied with what we got. So immediately after we said, give us a healthy baby, Chrissy and Margaret would say, I want a girl, I want a girl, I want a girl. And Jack is sitting on my lap, and he turns around and looks at me, and he says, I'm pulling on a boy. So I guess his pull on a boy was stronger than the girls I want a girl. So there was Paul, and Paul proceeded to kick Jack off my lap, well, before he was born.
So tell us about sweet little Paul.
And there was sweet little Paul, who looked like
an angel.
An angel, yes. When he was in the hospital, his aunt Martha was a nurse, a student nurse, in the delivery room, and she presided at his delivery. And she said, oh, and then when they brought him to me the first time, she came with him, and she said, oh, look, they haven't put the, whatever it is they put on the baby's card. And so she took him back and complained to the student nurses in the, so they got mad at her, and they painted Paul's whole stomach silver. Fortunately, it washes off.
So what? So right after Chris was born was when JFK had been assassinated.
Yes.
So what was that?
You were born.
No, I was born after. I was
when
November 11th, '64. He was assassinated.
That's right. That's right. I remember.
So was that a big event in your house, or
Oh,
not?
yes, that was a big event in everybody's house. It was so tragic. And we will all watch the funeral procession and little John saluting, and oh, it was so touching. It was just horrible.
Yeah.
And it was so scary to think that somebody could get to
So
them.
close, yeah.
It was just awful.
So right after the birth of the 4 kids, it starts hitting towards the mid, then late 60s, and of course, you have the Vietnam War beginning to erupt, and you have all this social unrest. Tell us briefly about that as we close out our talk about the 60s. What that was like, as the Vietnam War was kicking off, and you had all these sit-ins and peace demonstrations and stuff like that.
It was such a very different atmosphere from what had happened with World War II. I mean, World War II was just, in spite of all the deaths and it was positive. Everybody was believed that we were doing the right thing and that, our soldiers were wonderful and we loved them and all of that sort of thing. And then with Vietnam, it was just the opposite. It was just, there were people who said, yes, it's the right thing, and people who said no, and there were all the sit-ins and the marches and all that stuff, and it was very confusing. It was frustrating. It was sad. Men would come home from the war and people would spit on them. It was just horrible. It really was horrible. However, I had 4 little children, and when Paul was born, Margaret was only 5. So that means I had 4 children, the oldest being 5. And I was kind of busy. So I really didn't have time to take part in anything. I was busy taking care of my kids and breaking my arm and having reaction to a drug and having abscess behind my eye and walking around with a patch on this eye for 6 weeks and then on this eye for 6 weeks and it was, I was busy and we were moving and we, by this time, by the time Paul was born, 64, we were living on Dixdale. Not on Dixdale, on Girard. You were born in 64. No! 61, 63, 64, 66. Paul was born in 66. And just after he was born, I was in the hospital when Papa went to sign for our house on Girard. And so we moved in there, and Margaret started going to school at St. Albert the Great. She was in kindergarten there, and I think she even began first grade there. And they called me from school to tell me that Margaret had to stop walking on the top of the swing set.
With all her gymnastics.
She'd walk across the top, and they said, it's just too dangerous, So it was just a glorious time. It was wonderful. I loved it.
Okay.
And Papa was happy.
So,
he was working 3 jobs, but he was happy.
Yeah, so now obviously, as we enter the 70s, we've landed here in Columbia. We've, established our roots as a family, and the kids are heading off to schools and everything like that. So talk a little bit about the 70s and what was that like as you're sitting there trying to raise these 4 crazy kids and Papa's busy with work and all that stuff.
Well, it was good. I hated the house, so I'm happy to see all the changes. And it was like raising kids in a day camp. It was just wonderful. There were so many things for the kids to do. There were, in the summer when school was out, there were field trips and there were camps and there were sports of all kinds and there were friends everywhere. There were little kids the same age everywhere you looked and it was just wonderful. And the little girl that lived across the street said that later she told me that her mom always said, I can't believe how she gets dinner on the table and all 4 of them and her husband there to eat it.
Well, at the time you used to ring a bell. And
I had a big bell on the back porch.
Yeah, and we'd come running down. We'd be up at Longfellow and we'd hear it and we'd come running down. So what was maybe a few of the vacations that we took as a family that may be memorable
Well,
for
I
you?
did want to mention the fact too that when Chris was little, Dad took her down to the library in Louisville, the Central Library, for some kind of thing they were having one Sunday afternoon, where they were having street painting, you know, with chalks, colored chalks. And so he took Chrissy down there, and she was too young to participate. But they let her go ahead and color a block, you know, and she won the prize.
Yeah, she's always been very artistic.
Very
It's
artistic,
amazing.
yes. And
Yeah.
she did a painting that we had hanging in our house as the centerpiece for a long time.
And shortly after that, you had your oldest son had just won the Charlie Brown Award for flying a kite.
For not flying a
For
kite.
not- So Chris is the talented one. Too funny.
Well, Jack flew
Yeah.
other things.
Yeah, too funny.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about the 70s, you know, and the kid, you know, so that's mostly Longfellow and then Harper's Choice.
And I was
And
working
then
there.
high school.
Yeah, at first I worked there as a health assistant, and then I replaced Florence as the teacher secretary. And it was just a very pleasant job, and the kids all seemed to be mostly fairly well behaved. Oh, we had the coming of the Vietnamese children. You remember when they had boatloads of kids coming? Well, we had some Vietnamese children come, and one of them took shine to Jack, and he was going to teach Jack some things. And I said, oh, good, teach him some words in Vietnamese. That'll be good, you know, that's an advantage. So what he happened to teach Jack was curse words in English, which everybody could understand.
Had to throw one of those shooting stars and kill someone.
Yeah.
Too funny.
And I remember Paul was just so protective of my reputation. I really appreciate it. I had to deliver the daily bulletin every day, so I write it up, print it up on the computer, and then take it out through the school, give each teacher a copy. And as I walk through, you know, I participate in the class. And I remember one time Bankert was teaching his sex education class, and he drew a question out and asked me. I don't remember what the question was, but I remember thinking, well, I'm going to beat him up when I see him.
Too funny. Okay, so we're going to migrate now to the 80s.
The 80s.
80s. And that's a period when the kids are beginning to graduate from high school and beginning to head off to college and the parents' weekend, visiting.
All that stuff.
Margaret when she went down to Florida for that
training.
And then Chris at VCU, and then me out at the academy, and Paul out at Cornell. So a little bit about that, and some fun, fun stories or anecdotes.
Well, you know, that's a hard time for parents because you're used to having them around, and then all of a sudden they're gone. And then you just get used to that, and they come back for Christmas. And then you get used to them being there again, and they go. And it's, you know, it's just kind of hard. Kind of does something to your emotions and your heart a little bit, you know. But it's a wonderful time. You can see them growing and flourishing and just becoming people on their own and you know, finding their place in the world. It's just beautiful.
Well, I remember Dad was always so excited, you know, to go to the parents' weekend.
Oh, yes.
You know, we'd go up to Ithaca to see Paul, and he'd just be so excited. Or when he came to visit me, you know, just so excited.
You're so excited.
Yeah.
And you'd always say, let's go pick up a 6-pack and go back to the motel. And you and Dad would sit there on the beds in front of the TV with a bottle of beer, and neither one of you would finish it. You'd sound asleep. both of you.
Mhm.
But anyway, one time we went up to Paul's, to Cornell, and he decided that he would have a bunch of his friends come in to meet us. So in order to accomplish this, I was to bring a big pot of chili and some cornbread. So I took enough chili and a big pot and cornbread, and we went up there, and then the chili wouldn't thaw, and we had everybody out there stirring it over the stove, trying to get it melted. And one guy started talking to Papa, and Papa's telling him about his train trip, out to see you and through the mountains out there and so on, and over through North Dakota, visit a couple that we knew from Louisville. And so he was telling me about that, and this guy's eyes kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. He says, "This guy's like Jack Kerouac." He started telling everybody about Papa's trip on the train. It was,
I remember one time Papa came to see me in San Antonio, and he took the train out just himself, and he was told, I said, "Well, what led you to take the train out, and why San Antonio?" He goes, "Well, my allergies had been acting up." And I said, "Well, Dad, I had just looked at a map that showed that San Antonio was like the epicenter of allergens within the entire country." So Dad took the train right into the epicenter of allergens.
But so he turned around and went home.
No.
He stayed in business.
Yeah, too funny.
Yeah.
So, okay, so let's take a break for a minute, and then we'll regroup in just 5 minutes.